It was supposed to be just another regular Tuesday at my store, Second Chances. The sun streamed through the windows, casting warm light on the racks of adaptive clothing and accessories that lined the walls. My shop wasn't huge, but it was special. A place where people with disabilities could find things designed specifically for their needs, without feeling like they were an afterthought. I took pride in making sure everyone who walked in felt welcome and valued. After all, as someone who uses a prosthetic like myself, I knew what it was like to feel invisible. That's when she walked in. Karen Whitmore. If you've ever heard the phrase HOA Karen, this woman was the poster child. She strutted into the store like she owned the world, or at least our little corner of it. Her clipboard was clutched tightly against her chest, and her oversized sunglasses sat perched atop her perfectly styled hair. She didn't even glance at the displays or greet anyone. Nope, she went straight for the dramatic entrance. "Excuse me," she barked, loud enough to turn heads. Everyone in the store froze, including me. "I need to speak to the manager immediately." "That would be me," I said, stepping out from behind the counter. I gave her a polite smile and held out my hand, hoping to ease whatever tension was brewing. But instead of shaking my hand, her eyes zeroed in on my prosthetic leg. It had a custom floral design, bright, bold, and unapologetically cheerful. To me, it was a symbol of resilience. To her, clearly, it was something else entirely. "This is unacceptable," she snapped, ignoring my extended hand. Her voice dripped with disdain. "Your condition is making customers uncomfortable. You're setting a terrible example for this community." My stomach tightened, but I kept my cool. "Ma'am, I assure you, we welcome all kinds of customers here. This store is about inclusivity. If there's anything specific you'd like to discuss." Before I could finish, she did something that stopped me cold. In one swift motion, she lunged forward and ripped my prosthetic right off my leg. The room fell silent. Customers gasped, and my employees froze, unsure how to react. I stumbled back, grabbing onto the counter to steady myself. Pain shot through me, not because losing the prosthetic hurt physically, but because of the sheer humiliation. Here I was, standing in front of strangers, exposed and vulnerable, thanks to this woman's cruelty. Karen held my prosthetic up like it was evidence in a crime scene. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she screeched, waving it around like a trophy. "You're flaunting your disability like it's some kind of fashion statement. This isn't appropriate for a family-friendly establishment." My face burned with anger and shame, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Give that back," I said, holding out my hand. My voice was steady, though inside, I was seething. She sneered, tossing it onto the floor like it was garbage. "I'll do more than complain about this," she hissed. "I'll make sure you lose your job. No one wants to shop somewhere run by someone who looks like that." Oh, Karen, if only she knew. The store felt eerily quiet after Karen's outburst, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter for support. The embarrassment burned hot on my cheeks, but worse than that was the anger bubbling beneath the surface. How dare she treat me and my body like something disposable, like I was less than human. Mia, one of my employees, rushed over to help me reattach my prosthetic. Her hands were steady, but her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. Physically, I was fine. Emotionally, not so much. Every eye in the store was on me, and I hated it. Some customers looked sympathetic, others shocked, and a few even seemed uncomfortable, as if they weren't sure whether to stay or leave. But what cut deepest was the pity. I didn't want their pity. I wanted them to see me as a person, not a victim. Karen, meanwhile, stood near the entrance with her arms crossed, looking smug. She glanced around the room like she expected everyone to applaud her little performance. When no one did, her smile faltered just a bit. Still, she pressed on. "This is exactly why places like this shouldn't exist," she declared, gesturing dramatically at the racks of clothing. "It promotes negativity. People should focus on blending in, not drawing attention to themselves." That's when Maya lost it. Blending in. She shot back, her voice sharp enough to slice through steel. "You think people should hide who they are just to make you feel better? That's disgusting." Karen blinked, clearly caught off guard. For someone used to getting her way, being called out must have stung. But she quickly recovered, narrowing her eyes at Mia. "Watch your tone, young lady. I'm here to protect the integrity of this neighborhood. Someone has to set standards." "Standards?" Maya scoffed, folding her arms. "What, like ripping off someone's leg?" "Yeah, real classy." By now, murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few customers started nodding along with Mia, while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. One older woman stepped forward, her expression stern. "Ms. Whitmore, I've lived in this community for 20 years, and I've never seen behavior like this. You should be ashamed of yourself." Karen's face flushed red, but she didn't back down. Instead, she turned to me, jabbing a finger in my direction. "Mark my words, this isn't over. I'll go straight to corporate headquarters and demand action. No one will shop here once they know how unprofessional you are." Oh, sweet summer child. If only she knew. As soon as she stormed out of the store, slamming the door behind her, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The tension in the room eased slightly, but the mood remained heavy. Customers began to trickle out, offering apologies and words of encouragement as they left. "Don't let her get to you," one man said kindly. "She's not worth it." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to give up easily, and I knew she'd come back swinging. Still, I refused to let her ruin my day or my mission. This store meant too much to me, and to the people who relied on it. After locking up for the evening, I sat down in my office and stared at the pile of papers on my desk. Bills, inventory lists, employee schedules, they all blurred together as my mind raced. Then an idea hit me. What if I turned this into an opportunity? Karen thought she could bully me into submission, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number of a local news station. They'd been trying to feature second chances for weeks, and now I had the perfect story. Within minutes, I had a reporter on the line, eager to hear every detail. As I recounted what happened, I felt a spark of hope ignite inside me. Maybe this wasn't just about me versus Karen anymore. Maybe it was about something bigger. The next morning, I woke up with a mix of emotions swirling in my chest: anger, frustration, and a strange sense of determination. Karen's words from the day before still echoed in my mind. "I'll make sure you lose your job." The audacity of her threat was laughable, but it also made me realize something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. As I unlocked the store and flipped on the lights, I noticed a small crowd already gathered outside. Word had spread quickly about what happened, and people were showing up to show their support. Some brought coffee, others held signs that read, "We stand with you," and "Disability Pride Forever." Seeing them there filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected. For once, I didn't feel alone in this fight. Inside, my team was buzzing with energy. Mia was pacing behind the counter, muttering under her breath about how she wished she'd recorded Karen's meltdown. Jake, another employee, was busy organizing a display of adaptive tools near the front window, making sure it caught the attention of anyone passing by. "Let's turn this into a statement," he said firmly. "If Karen wants drama, we'll give her drama, but on our terms." That's when I decided to take things to the next level. I called an impromptu meeting with my staff and explained my plan. "Karen thinks she can intimidate us into shutting down," I began, looking each of them in the eye. "But instead of backing down, Let's use this moment to shine a light on why this store exists. Let's remind people that accessibility isn't optional, it's essential. Everyone nodded enthusiastically, throwing out ideas. We agreed to decorate the storefront with messages celebrating disability pride and resilience. Someone suggested setting up a community board where customers could share their own stories of overcoming challenges. Another idea was to host a pop-up event featuring local artists and creators with disabilities. By the time the meeting ended, we had a game plan and a renewed sense of purpose. Later that afternoon, the first news crew arrived. They set up cameras outside the store and interviewed me about what had happened. I kept my tone calm but firm, emphasizing that this wasn't just a personal attack, it was part of a larger issue. People like Karen try to silence those who are different, I told the reporter. But here at Second Chances, we believe diversity makes us stronger, and we're not going anywhere. Social media exploded almost instantly. Clips of the interview went viral, along with photos of our newly decorated storefront. Hashtags like #StandWithSecondChances and #DisabilityPride started trending, drawing attention from all over the country. Messages poured in from strangers sharing their gratitude for spaces like mine. One woman wrote, "Your store gave me hope when I thought I'd never feel normal again." Another said, "Thank you for fighting back against ignorance. You're inspiring so many of us." But while the internet rallied behind me, Karen wasn't done yet. That evening, as I was closing up shop, a sleek black car pulled up outside. Out stepped Karen, flanked by two men in cheap suits who introduced themselves as lawyers. She marched toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her face twisted in fury. "You've caused quite the scene," she spat, jabbing a finger in my direction. "If you don't comply with the HOA's demands, we'll sue you for everything you've got." Behind her, Mia rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Good luck with that," she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Karen whipped around, glaring daggers. "And who are you?" "The person who recorded your little tantrum yesterday," Maya shot back sweetly. "In HD, with audio." For a split second, Karen's mask of confidence slipped. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But just as quickly, she regained her composure, narrowing her eyes at me. "This isn't over," she hissed before storming back to her car. Watching her leave, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt like we actually had the upper hand. Karen had underestimated us, and now she was about to learn exactly who she was dealing with. The days that followed Karen's visit with her so-called lawyers felt like a whirlwind. The entire neighborhood, and beyond, was talking about what had happened. My little store, Second Chances, had become the center of attention in ways I never could have imagined. People stopped by just to offer words of encouragement or drop off baked goods. One elderly woman handed me a card with a heartfelt note inside. "Thank you for standing tall when others tried to cut you down." It made my throat tighten every time I read it. But not everyone was on our side. Some neighbors, likely swayed by Karen's influence, avoided the store altogether. They shot disapproving glances from behind their curtains or whispered to each other when they thought I couldn't hear. It stung, sure, but it also fueled my determination. I refused to let fear dictate how I ran my business or lived my life. Karen, predictably, doubled down on her campaign against me. Flyers appeared on mailboxes across the neighborhood, supposedly from the HOA, accusing Second Chances of being a nuisance and claiming we were lowering property values. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, running a store that helped people gain independence and confidence, and somehow that was considered a threat. If anything, it proved just how out of touch Karen and her cronies really were. One afternoon, as I sorted through inventory in the back room, Mia burst in looking both gleeful and furious. "You're not going to believe this," she said, holding up her phone. On the screen was a screenshot of a private HOA message board someone had leaked online. The thread was filled with posts from Karen and other members discussing ways to shut us down. One particularly nasty comment stood out. If we make enough noise, maybe they'll relocate somewhere else, somewhere less visible. I stared at the words, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Visible. That single word hit hard because it revealed everything wrong with their mindset. They didn't want us to exist quietly. They didn't want us to exist at all. But instead of letting it crush me, I used it as fuel. They don't get it, do they? I muttered to Mia. Being visible is exactly why this place matters. That night, I called Diane, a lawyer friend who specialized in civil rights cases, and laid out the situation. She listened intently, occasionally muttering under her breath about how ridiculous Karen's behavior was. By the end of the call, she was practically growling. This isn't just harassment, it's discrimination, she said firmly. And trust me, courts hate discrimination. With Diane on board, we drafted a lawsuit against the HOA for violating disability rights and attempting to coerce me into closing my business. We included screenshots of the leaked message board, copies of the flyers, and statements from customers willing to testify about the positive impact second chances had on their lives. When Karen heard about the legal action, she showed up at the store again, this time flanked by even more supporters. "You're making a huge mistake," she hissed, pacing back and forth in front of the counter. Her voice trembled with barely contained rage. "Do you have any idea how much damage you've done to this community?" I leaned forward, meeting her gaze head-on. "Actually, I think the real question is how much damage you've done to this neighborhood, to your reputation, and to yourself. This isn't about property values or aesthetics, Karen. It's about control. And guess what? You can't control me." Her face turned bright red, and for a moment, I thought she might explode. Instead, she spun around and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the bell above it jingled wildly. Behind her, a small group of protesters outside cheered and held up signs that read, "HOAs don't rule us," and "Inclusion over exclusion." As I watched them, I felt a surge of gratitude and resolve. This fight wasn't easy, and it wasn't over yet, but I knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened next, I wouldn't back down. Not for Karen, not for anyone. The court case dragged on for months, turning into a roller coaster of emotions that left me exhausted but more determined than ever. Every hearing, every deposition, every late-night strategy session with Diane felt like another hurdle in a race I couldn't afford to lose. Karen and the HOA threw everything they had at us. Accusations about noise complaints, claims that my store violated zoning laws, even attempts to argue that my prosthetic display was somehow inappropriate for public viewing. It was absurd, but it also showed just how desperate they were to shut me down. Karen herself became a regular fixture at the courthouse, always dressed impeccably in designer suits and oversized sunglasses, as if she were auditioning for some legal drama. She strutted around like she owned the place, barking orders at her lawyers and glaring daggers at anyone who dared look at her sideways. But beneath her polished exterior, I could see cracks forming. Her confidence wavered whenever Diane questioned her motives or presented evidence of her discriminatory behavior. And when Mia took the stand to describe how Karen had ripped off my prosthetic right in front of customers, Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Do you deny these allegations?" Diane asked coolly during one particularly heated cross-examination. She held up photos of the incident, which sent murmurs rippling through the courtroom. I wasn't aware it would cause such distress," Karen stammered, clearly flustered. For someone who prided herself on being in control, she looked anything but. Diane didn't let up. "So you admit that your actions were intentional, that you knowingly disrespected someone based on their disability?" Karen sputtered, glancing helplessly at her attorneys, but they seemed just as rattled as she was. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "We'll move on," he said dryly, though his tone suggested he'd already made up his mind about Karen's credibility. Outside the courtroom, things weren't much better for her. Protesters gathered daily, holding signs and chanting slogans like "accessibility is not optional." Local news stations covered the story extensively, painting Karen as the villain she truly was. Social media amplified the message, with hashtags like #BoycottKaren trending nationwide. Businesses she frequented started distancing themselves, and neighbors who once supported her began avoiding her calls. Even her own family seemed to be keeping their distance. I spotted her teenage son at the grocery store one day, looking thoroughly embarrassed as he tried to ignore the stares. Through it all, I focused on staying grounded. The stress of the trial weighed heavily on me, but I reminded myself why I was fighting, not just for me, but for everyone who deserved to live without fear of judgment or exclusion. Customers continued to visit Second Chances, sharing stories of how the store had changed their lives. One young girl with a spinal condition hugged me tightly after finding a pair of adaptive jeans that fit perfectly. "Thank you for making clothes for kids like me," she whispered. Moments like that kept me going, even on the hardest days. Finally, the verdict came. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the judge delivered his ruling. In favor of Second Chances, he not only dismissed the HOA's claims, but also issued a permanent injunction preventing them from interfering with my business. Additionally, Karen was personally fined for her role in the incident, and the HOA was ordered to undergo mandatory sensitivity training, a punishment that felt almost poetic. As the gavel came down, I glanced at Karen, expecting to see anger or defiance. Instead, I saw something else: defeat. She sat slumped in her chair, staring blankly ahead, her usual bravado completely gone. For once, she wasn't the one calling the shots, and it showed. Walking out of the courthouse that day, surrounded by supporters and friends, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. This chapter of my life had been painful and exhausting, but it had also taught me something invaluable. Standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about refusing to let others define your worth. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew I'd face them head-on, just like I always had. The aftermath of the trial hit Karen and the HOA like a tidal wave. For someone who thrived on control, losing the case must have felt like the ground crumbling beneath her feet. The judge's ruling didn't just shut down their attempts to close Second Chances. It exposed their actions for what they truly were: discriminatory, petty, and downright cruel. And while I wasn't out for revenge, there was a certain satisfaction in watching karma finally catch up with them. Karen tried to put on a brave face at first, insisting to anyone who would listen that she'd been misunderstood. But no one was buying it anymore. Her carefully constructed image as the neighborhood's moral compass had shattered, leaving behind only the ugly truth. Neighbors who once praised her leadership now avoided eye contact when they passed her on the street. Even her loyal followers within the HOA began distancing themselves, muttering excuses about how they'd never really agreed with her tactics in the first place. It was almost comical how quickly the tide turned against her. Not long after the verdict, Karen resigned from her position as HOA president. Rumor had it she sold her house shortly afterward, packing up her designer bags and moving to another state where no one knew her name or her reputation. She left without so much as a goodbye, slipping away quietly in the middle of the night like a shadow retreating from the light. Part of me wondered if she'd learned anything from all this, but honestly, I didn't care enough to lose sleep over it. Meanwhile, Second Chances flourished in ways I could never have imagined. The publicity from the trial brought in customers from neighboring towns, eager to support a business that stood for inclusivity and resilience. Sales skyrocketed, allowing me to expand the store's inventory and hire more staff. We even added a cozy cafe area where patrons could sit, chat, and share stories, a space designed to foster connection and community. Watching people laugh and bond over coffee while surrounded by products meant to empower them filled me with a sense of purpose I couldn't put into words. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was emotional. Every day, strangers walked into the store and thanked me for creating a place where they felt seen and valued. Parents of children with disabilities hugged me, tears streaming down their faces, saying things like, "You've given my kid hope." Veterans stopped by to talk about their experiences adjusting to prosthetics, finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone. Even older folks dealing with mobility issues found solace in our adaptive tools and clothing, telling me how much easier daily tasks had become because of us. One afternoon, as I was helping a customer pick out a pair of slip-on sneakers, Mia approached me with a grin. "You know what's funny?" she said, leaning casually against the counter. "Karen probably thought tearing off your prosthetic would ruin you. Instead, it made you unstoppable." She wasn't wrong. That single act of cruelty had backfired spectacularly, turning me into a symbol of resistance, not just for my own community, but for anyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. What started as a personal attack had grown into something far bigger than I ever anticipated. A movement. As the weeks turned into months, the neighborhood itself began to change. People seemed lighter, freer. Kids played in the streets without fear of judgment, and neighbors greeted each other warmly instead of whispering behind closed doors. The oppressive cloud of perfectionism Karen had enforced for years had lifted, replaced by a spirit of acceptance and understanding. Still, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. Losing my leg had taught me resilience, but facing Karen had reminded me of my strength. Owning this store gave me purpose, and standing up to bullies like her proved that sometimes the greatest victories come from refusing to back down. Months after the trial, life in the neighborhood felt like it had shifted into a new rhythm. The tension that once hung heavy in the air was gone, replaced by a sense of warmth and openness. People smiled more, waved hello to strangers, and lingered longer on front porches instead of retreating behind closed doors. It was as if Karen's reign of control had cast a shadow over Willow Creek, and now that she was gone, the sun finally broke through. For me, running Second Chances became less about surviving and more about thriving. The store wasn't just a business anymore. It was a hub for connection and empowerment. Every day brought new stories, new faces, and new reminders of why I started this journey in the first place. One elderly man came in searching for adaptive gardening tools so he could keep tending to his beloved flower beds despite his arthritis. A young woman with cerebral palsy found a pair of shoes designed specifically for braces, tears welling up in her eyes as she said, "I never thought something like this existed." Moments like those made every challenge worth it. The cafe area quickly became my favorite part of the store. Customers gathered there to share their experiences, laugh over shared struggles, and offer advice to one another. Some days, I'd sit at a corner table with a cup of coffee, listening to conversations unfold around me. Parents swapped tips on navigating school systems for kids with disabilities. College students discussed how to advocate for accessibility on campus. Even complete strangers bonded over their love of adaptive sports or fashion. Watching these connections form reminded me that inclusion isn't just about products. It's about people. Mia often joked that we should rename the store Second Chances and Second Cups, given how many customers return not just for our inventory, but for the community we built. She was right. The energy inside those walls was electric, a testament to what happens when you create a space where everyone belongs. As for Karen, whispers of her name eventually faded altogether. No one knew, or cared, where she'd ended up. Occasionally, someone would mention her during a conversation, usually followed by a sarcastic comment like, "Remember when she thought she could boss everyone around?" But mostly, she became irrelevant, a footnote in the story of Willow Creek's transformation. The HOA, too, underwent changes. New leadership stepped in, focusing on collaboration rather than control. They even reached out to me once, asking if I'd be willing to host a workshop on disability awareness. I agreed, but only because I wanted them to see firsthand the power of empathy. At night, when the store was quiet and the lights were low, I'd sometimes sit in my office and reflect on everything that had happened. Losing my leg had been hard, yes, but it taught me resilience. Facing Karen had been terrifying, but it reminded me of my strength. And owning this store, well, it gave me purpose. A reason to wake up every morning excited about what lay ahead. Life doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes it throws challenges your way that feel impossible to overcome. But if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that standing up, even when the odds seem insurmountable, is worth it. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who needs to know they're not alone. One evening, as I locked up the shop and headed home, I paused under the glow of the streetlights. The neighborhood looked peaceful, almost magical in the twilight. Kids chased each other across lawns, laughter ringing out into the cool night air. For a moment, I let myself take it all in, the beauty, the progress, the hope. Then I smiled, turned the key in my car ignition, and drove off into the night, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring.